Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Lesson 6, Section 2 in the Geography of Rome. So today we're going to talk a lot about background information about the Etruscan influence on the Romans. All right, so remember, if you recall, the Etruscans are going to be the people of northern Italy before the Roman Empire. All right, so the bell work is on the board. I could analyze the engineering and architecture of the Romans. The engineering piece and the architecture piece, a lot of that is going to be the influence of the Etruscans on the Romans, so we'll get into that. Obviously, there's a little bit of Greek influence as well. So we're going to talk about all that and more. And if we're not familiar with engineering or what architecture means, we'll get into that as well. So make sure you jot that down. I can just analyze the engineering and architecture of the Romans. All right, let's go ahead and get started and begin. All right, so the Romans became known for building, excellent builders. And it's going to be all different forms of things that you'll still see today. So builders, let's start off right off the bat. Builders is going to be our key word. Builders is going to be our key word. Romans became excellent builders. And there's a lot that we're going to discuss on the building piece here. So builders is going to be our key word. Builders. So the Romans learned their engineering techniques from the Etruscans. All right, so engineering is the science of building. So we have two things going on here. If you look at the bottom right corner, let's start there. This is an engineering masterpiece of the Romans. If you look, these are magnificent bridges, and it's not just a bridge with like a piece of wood across one side to another. These are very, very intricate designs. Very difficult to build, right? How are these bridges being supported with minimal amounts of bricks or stones? And so that's the art of engineering. They have to know the science behind what will keep these things up and keep them up for a long period of time. A lot of these bridge and ancient buildings in Rome still exist today. Some of the oldest buildings over 2,000 years ago still stand strong and stand the test of time in the worst storms, the worst weather conditions, and all of that. All right, so that will be considered the arch. An arch, as you see on the picture in the bottom right corner, how many different arches there are in this bridge. You know, you can tell that on the top there's all these little small arches, probably 30 of those, and like 10 more giant ones. So there's like 40 arches in one bridge. The arch is a huge piece of Roman engineering. And also the canalculus, which is going to be another vocabulary word. The canalculus is what's going to be pictured in the top right corner. It doesn't look like much, right? But this is what one is drained. So canalculus is an Etruscan underground irrigation system. What that means is these are like sewers, waterways to get water from one place to another without having to physically travel there. So think about a sewer or anything in your home. All right, water is there, then it's gone without thinking about it. But these had to be invented, and they were invented by the Etruscans and the Romans. The canalculus is what the original version was called, to get water to and from wherever you want it to be. All right, so this is going to be a pretty significant invention in the ancient world. All right, agree or disagree here? Engineering, the science of building sounds like an interesting job. In college, you can get a degree in engineering, which actually pays a lot of money. If you can get a job in engineering, you can be pretty successful. So if you feel like you're good at building Legos or just building things in general, if that interests you, it's something you should probably pursue in the future. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about these arches. This is an up-close view of an arch on the right corner here. That you can see how does the middle of this arch get supported if there's nothing keeping it up, right? How are these Etruscan arches resting on two pillars? How does this all work? Well, it's the science behind it all. It's supported by half circles of stones going all the way up. And then the main piece is this piece right in the middle. This is called the keystone, the center keystone piece that holds the rest in play. It divides, and I don't want to pretend like I know everything about engineering. Pretty ignorant when it comes to the subject, but The whole thing is about getting and dividing pressure amongst each piece. Each piece holds a significant amount of pressure that's distributed evenly. So that way, all of it is not going to one spot. So the key centerpiece, the keystone, keeps it all together. So that's going to make keystone our keyword. Keystone is going to be our keyword. The center keystone of an arch is what keeps it together. All right, so keystone is going to be our keyword. If you go to Europe, you'll see arches everywhere. Even the background. Look at the background to see the doorway to that person's home. You can see that there is an arch there as well. Arches are everywhere. Even in downtown Akron. You maybe wouldn't notice an arch normally, but now that you are thinking about it, and you can find places that have arches as designs. And this is going to be all the way back from the time of our ancient Etruscans and Romans. They use arches to build public works. We already talked about bridges, stadiums for entertainment. Those had just a bunch of different arches and unique designs. Back in the ancient Roman times, there's a lot of unique, sometimes even animals built into the side of buildings. Statues that represents gods and kings and public figures, all built within the architecture of a building. So it's pretty unique and fancy, and they still exist. That's what makes it pretty interesting. Where have you seen an arch before? And you could say an easy answer: the golden arches of McDonald's, right? Those are technical arches, right? But you could see doorways, and a lot of the times in churches. Churches have arches and things of that nature. All right. Two famous arches in the United States. We have the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri. This arch is so large you can see it anywhere in the city. This is going to be our famous Gateway Arch to the west. You'll learn a lot more about that in 8th grade. And then we have a natural arch in the Arches National Park in Utah. And this is just not even man-made. This comes naturally from Mother Earth. All right, and next up, another invention of engineering from the ancient Etruscans and then becoming perfected by our Romans is going to be the canoculus. The canoculus, long underground trenches, right? So here's a different view of the canoculus going in two different directions, almost making a Y shape. So if you need water up over these hills over here, the canoculus will get you water there. Also, it can drain farms. So if farms have too much water, that's an issue as well. So canoculus will drain excess water and send it out to wherever you need it. They were connected by vertical shafts above the ground. They're having multiple purposes. The canoculus were great for distributing water into cities, right? So if you need more water in Rome, you need more water in Florence, they can get the water to wherever you need it. And also for irrigating land and draining swamps. Too much water in one spot can be a problem as well. Flooding and all sorts of things like that. So that's going to make irrigating our keyword. Irrigating is going to be our keyword as the irrigation systems, like the canoculus, will help water get to and from where it ever needs to be. So irrigating is going to be our keyword. That is irrigating. A canoculus distributes water to cities. That is true. All right. A city without any water systems make it very, very difficult to live and to manage, especially if the population is large. All right, how are we feeling? We've talked about engineering, we've talked about canoculus, we talked about arches, and we're going to do a little bit more about architecture as well as we move forward. So all this has influence by the Etruscans, right? The Etruscans influenced the Romans in several different ways. All right, let's talk a little bit about Etruscan sports. And one of these sports is called slave fighting, pictured in the top right corner. All right, so Romans adapted the Etruscan sports that they used from early times. We're talking about 3,000 years ago. So sports is going to be our keyword. Sports is going to be our keyword here. We're going to talk about two different sports by the Etruscans that the Romans adapted. So sports is our key word. The first sport we're going to talk about here is going to be slave fighting. Unfortunately, The people that were conquered by the Roman empires would eventually become enslaved peoples. So what a slave fight would be is if, say, someone's owner died, or say they had multiple enslaved people, and the owner died. So the two enslaved people, instead of becoming free, unfortunately for them, living already dreadful lives, that they would actually have to fight each other with swords in an arena for the free entertainment of the people that lived there. So when the match ended, that is when someone killed the other person. One enslaved person killed the other. And then, unfortunately, the winner isn't much of a winner at all because they would be executed after the match. So this was just for entertainment purposes, for the people and for the rulers. And obviously, the worst outcome and the worst fate for the people actually fighting in the match. So the first sport we talked about is slave fighting, depicted in the top right corner, also sometimes referred to as gladiators, and we'll talk about that moving forward as well. All right, so how do you feel about the sport of slave fighting? Obviously, very uncivilized, right? So we can tell how far we've come as a society to make that completely unacceptable 3,000 years later. All right, the other sport, maybe more familiar to what we know about today. This one's going to be chariot racing. Chariot racing, depicted in the top right corner. Chariots is when you have horses pulling a person on a wagon behind. All right, so the wagon has got some wheels. The competitor will be holding on to the ropes that are attached to the horses, and they'll be racing each other around a track. Competitors would be strapped to their chariots. This is going to be a pretty dangerous sport, right? Because if the horses flipped your cart, if there's multiple competitors at once, you could potentially get toppled over, you can potentially get trampled by horses, and you could potentially die from the horses as well. All right, so competitors is going to be our key word. Competitors as our key word. These competitors were for the entertainment of the people in the area, performing in giant arenas or stages. The most famous place for competitors would be the Colosseum, which we'll talk about, I believe, in the next slide. But yes, this was a very dangerous sport that could lead to death. It could lead to injury. Because the tide turns, the horses could be amped up. Sometimes they would collide into each other on purpose. All sorts of things going on here when it comes to our chariot races. Okay, so two forms of entertainment for ancient Romans. We have slave fights, and then we have chariot races. All right, drag your icons over to ancient Roman sports. Top left corner, again, as the gladiator slave fighting. Top right corner, we have the chariot racing. Football and baseball, even though they look old, are actually relatively new sports, being like 200 or 300 years old, as opposed to like 2,000 or 3,000 years old. All right, let's finish up here. Etruscan sports did gain some popularity over time, and unfortunately for the people that actually had to perform, or the competitors in the sport, thousands of slaves or enslaved people died over the years in these stadiums for the entertainment of these people. Again, they're referred to as gladiators. Gladiator is a person trained to fight for public entertainment. A gladiator is going to be a vocabulary word, person trained to fight for public entertainment. I'm also going to make gladiator or gladiators our keyword as well. Gladiators is going to be our key word. There is a famous movie called The Gladiator that depicts this, and this picture right here is actually from that movie. So gladiator is going to be our keyword. So gladiators also would fight animals as well. All right, so it could be a bear, it could be a tiger, a lion, any type of animal. So it didn't necessarily have to be a person or another enslaved person that were fighting. It could have been that, like an animal. And sometimes they wouldn't give you a sword or shield or anything. You would just be tossed into a cage with a wild animal. So obviously they didn't value the lives of these people too highly. All right. All right. Hopefully you are feeling well. We have covered architecture, and we have covered sports, we covered engineering, canaculuses, we talked about arches, all sorts of things. So like and subscribe, and I'll come around if you need any assistance.